So let's take a look at some of the newest polling, which is showing that some recent endorsements have done little to move the needle in Iowa's upcoming Republican caucuses. In the latest NBC News Des Moines Register Mediacom poll, 54% of likely caucus goers say it doesn't matter that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was recently endorsed by the state's own Republican governor, Kim Reynolds, and more than 70% say it doesn't matter that DeSantis is being backed by a key evangelical leader in the state, or that former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has the endorsement of the conservative Koch political network. Chris Matthews, wonder what you think of that. And I'd like to add into the overall challenge for President Biden is, you know, you see these poll numbers coming out, and I think Democrats get nervous, legitimately. You feel like the numbers should be farther apart. And I think also, especially on the issue of abortion, when you see cases like the one in Texas playing out, doesn't that spell out for busy voters who may have a lot on their plates and they're not tuning in right now? But isn't a case like that something that makes you stop and think?
Well, it sure does. I mean, we've all thought that Roe v. Wade was not perfect, but it worked.
No.
And a lot of people said it's not quite right with my moral framework. Of course, that's the case. It was a compromise. But it did segment people into the 3 trimesters, and it did protect life, and it did do something in terms of society's concern. This new thing of just everybody for himself and this crazy lieutenant governor down to that lieutenant, what is it, special prosecutor down there in Texas. Paxton's all over the place acting like he's God. It's ridiculous. And but I think what's going on, I looked at the Wall Street Journal poll pretty clearly this weekend. It's interesting, you know, we thought that who's going to vote for Trump this time that didn't vote for him last time? I heard that a million times within the liberal bubble. Oh, no, they'll never vote for, well, 95% are going to vote for him who voted for him last time. Biden's down there about 20 points below. Biden's nowhere near this baked in the cake cultist attitude that the Republicans have towards MAGA. They're cultists about it. They don't think about other candidates. They may like Nikki Haley and say she puts on a good show in the debates. They might like her style, her sort of brain. But, you know, they don't change. That's what's amazing. These people are not changing their minds. They are in the cult. They are with this guy in MAGA. There's no intellectual aspect to it. There's no, well, I disagree with him on that, or I didn't like the way he behaved yesterday, or what's he talking about being some sort of authoritarian for the first day? They don't think like that. They're for Trump. That is the crazy thing about these primaries. Just a month from now, they're going to have Iowa caucuses. So what? I mean, what's going to happen? Probably DeSantis will get 20% or something, and maybe Nikki Haley get 19. What difference does it make? The other guy got them all.
And Lonnie,
the rest of it.
Lonnie, if you look at what a lot of these candidates were banking on, which they've said privately and some now say publicly, is that his legal problems, or Donald Trump, would help them. That voters would finally look at him in a courtroom and say, I just can't do it again. Actually, the opposite is true, as we see in the latest poll out of Iowa, that none of the conventional things that used to matter in politics apply to Donald Trump. That is to say, Governor Reynolds of Iowa or evangelical groups endorsing other candidates. It does not matter.
Yeah, I mean, look, the rules have changed. What we know is that a lot of the factors that would have been huge, endorsement of the sitting governor of the state, I mean, as you say, that would have been huge. But I think that the reality here is, for Donald Trump, it's not just that he wins. It's going to be the question of the margin he wins by. And I think the expectation's been set up that he's got to win by such a significant margin. Now, if he doesn't, I think then it becomes an interesting question. Let's say he wins by 8 points and not 20. If he wins by 20, it is what it is. If he wins by a smaller margin, then it becomes potentially more interesting as we set up toward New Hampshire, we set up toward South Carolina. I'm not saying it's going to change the outcome. I'm just saying that it changes the dynamic a little bit in a way that I don't think people have expected.
You mentioned, Lonnie, immigration and the economy. And the question that the White House asks itself is, looking at just the data, looking at the numbers of unemployment being low, GDP is up, gas prices are coming down, inflation's ticking down a little bit. Why people feel the way they do about this economy?
Yeah, it's a vexing problem, I think, for the White House, because the economic measures do suggest an economy that on many measures is doing well. I think it's how people feel about the economy. One thing to point out is that there are more Americans since the start of the pandemic who are working multiple jobs. And what that tells us is that a lot of Americans are having to work very hard to make it work. Inflation has tamed. There's no question about that. But the problem is that the $5 loaf of bread is not going back to $4 or $3. The fact that it's $5.02 as opposed to $5.10. The challenge is, how do you message around that? Well, it's better than it was. But the reality is, for many Americans, it's a very, very difficult daily economic condition. Even if the labor market numbers are good, the growth numbers are good, we're seeing a lot of suggestions that the economy we're going to have this soft landing people have talked about. But, the challenge is, how do people feel? And I think people feel economically a little bit of anxiety still.
Katy, Lenny just pointed out an obvious fact that it's how people feel about the economy. And yet there's also a subplot there, how people feel about the country itself. And I think a lot of people feel that the United States, a lot of Americans feel that the country is just so dysfunctional right now that they can't get a handle on where do we go next. And by next, by their future, I mean a month from now, 6 months from now, not down the road. And I'm wondering what the feeling is. Is there a similar feeling about the United States now enveloping European thought about the United States?
I think that's been there for a while, honestly, Mike, the feeling that you can't quite trust America. And people were looking to the next election and the conversation here. I mean, I went through a few years where people didn't ask me every time I came to Europe, what about Donald Trump? And it was kind of nice to talk about something else. But I'm back here now, and the first conversation that everybody has, the first question I'm asked is Donald Trump going to be reelected? And that's kind of, casual day-to-day conversations, but those are also the conversations that are being asked in governments all around Europe, and they honestly don't have an answer as to how they would deal with that. Everybody expects that America would pull out of NATO, that funding for Ukraine would stop, that Russia would win in Ukraine and potentially take over Ukraine, and other countries as well could then feel vulnerable. And there's an awful lot of uncertainty around the political instability in America every time the debt ceiling is broached. But there isn't really another game in town still. I mean,
no.
People look to China, and they don't necessarily want China to be the world's only superpower. So I think there's a feeling that they would like America to be more functional, to work better as a government, to be more reliable as a partner and an ally, but they know that they can't count on that at the moment.
Chris Matthews, this may... I'm sure it's naive on my part, but if Trump wins the primary by a wide margin, is there going to be any regret among the primary opponents for not fully going after him, except for Chris Christie? I mean, there's so much material. And you think of John McCain at that moment with that voter when he said, no, he's a good man, when they were trying to say something incorrect. A great moment. Yeah. And there's so many opportunities for that moment. But I guess what is the primary voters they can't handle that moment?
It's a great question. I think in the short run, no. I think I looked at the candidates and how they're standing in the latest Wall Street Journal poll this weekend. And all the three candidates on that stage, the most recent debate and all the debates, who've never questioned Trump, and that would be Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right.
All three of them have just laid down, if you will, for Trump. They're all ahead of Chris Christie. All three of them are ahead of Chris. So not only does Trump get his 50% roughly of the vote, but he gets another 40% or 45% of those who lay down for him. So he's running about 95%, really. They're afraid of him. Even now, Ron DeSantis is thinking about 28. We all know he's thinking about 28. Well, he can't be thinking about 24. He's thinking about 28. Where's he going to be? He wants to run against, Gavin Newsom, maybe. I mean, I don't know what he's thinking about, but he wants to stay alive down in Florida. And he's afraid of Trump. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how scaredy cats they are, to use a kid's expression. They're scaredy cats of this guy. And the only one is Chris Christie, who I love what he does, because I love having someone tell the truth, because that's refreshing for a few minutes every night for a 2-hour debate. And I like him. Yeah. And I think Chris Christie would have been a great Reagan Democrat back in the 80s. He would have been a great Reagan Republican. He is a classic, the kind of guy I grew up with, who my dad hung out with. He's a good guy. Mm-hmm. But he's not with this crowd. This crowd is strange. He may pull out of the race to help Nikki, but I'll tell you, he seems like a good guy to be president. And The others look like they don't have the guts to be president, really. And even Nikki is not showing the guts that she has to show for the future. And she has a future. I don't think.